Good morning again, and thank you for coming to the first Eileen Bohn Speaker Series program for the League of Women Voters of Door County. My name is Nancy Fisher, and I am the president of the local chapter, one of 18 chapters in the state of Wisconsin, and more than 650 across the United States. This is a 100-year-old organization of men and women dedicated to educate, advocate, and motivate on issues of great importance. They range from the integrity of elections to respect for basic human dignity to concerns for the environment. Here in Door County, we are active throughout the year. Perhaps you attended the first Assembly Race Candidate Forum last fall or the Sturgeon Bay City Council Forum 2 months ago. The League is steadfastly nonpartisan, giving us unique credibility in voter education efforts. When the League and another organization have similar goals, we join to present programs like the United to Amend program in January, dealing with money in politics, or next month's event with the Climate Change Coalition of Door County. Last December, Amy Kohnle, our local executive director of United Way, gave us the first introduction to the ALICE program in Wisconsin. And this immediately piqued our interest. So today, the League, working closely with United Way, is to present a larger discussion about ALICE. There is just one person who deserves the credit for organizing this special day. She is a retired teacher from Sevastopol Schools. She is a County of Door board supervisor for the Nassau area. Thankfully, she is our League board secretary and truly an inspired leader. I'm delighted to introduce Susan Kohout.
That was pretty sweet for this early in the morning. Thank you very much. Am I loud enough for everyone? If I speak like this, am I? Okay. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming today. This is the first program, as Nancy said, of our new Eileen Bohn Speaker Series. And we believe we have a wonderful and important topic to present to you by a group of terrific speakers. Eileen Bohn was a longtime member of the Door County League, moving here in the 60s and getting so involved that by the early 70s she was president of the local chapter. Even in recent years when health intervened, not allowing her to be as active, she was always a voice of reason. I think I had her on speed dial. She was calm, and her wisdom could be called upon by current leaders for her flawless judgment and discretion. When Eileen died in June, her family generously donated money in her memory to establish the Eileen Bohn Speaker Fund. The fund will be used to bring quality speakers to the county each year to speak on issues of importance on a wide range of issues. Eileen was very committed to the League and to working on all of these issues and worked hard over the years to promote good government. We are very grateful to her family for helping us continue that work. If you are interested, there is a little folder over on the table that tells you a little bit more about Eileen and the speaker series. We are also grateful to many people in addition to the Bohn family for making this event possible. Town of Bailey's Harbor for this wonderful venue, the media for publicizing this event and covering it today, Laddie Chapman, who is generously volunteering to videotape this program, which will be broadcast on Door and Kewanee Charter TV channels 986. The first time it will be broadcast will be tomorrow night at 7 p.m. and then a couple of times a day in the next few weeks. There is a card that there are a number of his cards over on that table, and if you take one, it will give you some additional information where you can go to look at the schedule as to when it will be broadcast. But if you are not available to charter, you still can find it on the web at www.doorbell.net/video. So thank you very much, Laddie, and also for advising us on the microphones and things. It's nice to have people who know about technology. Our morning schedule will begin with Charlene Mouille, who will present the United Way's Alice Project. Then we'll take a brief break to refill our cups and plates. At 10:45 or thereabouts, we will return to our panel of local experts, Caleb Frostman from Door County Economic Development, Carol Wautlet from Department of Human Services, Mary Ellen Smith from Door County Public Health Department, Amy Kohnle, who is our local United Way Executive Director, and Sandy Soik from Lakeshore CAP. And they will help us put a face on the Alice population in Door County. And then there will be time for questions. So let's begin with our keynote speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce Charlene Mouille, who has for more than 24 years had experience in the health and human services field. She joined United Way in 2014 to lead United Way of Wisconsin and became the executive director of 211 Wisconsin in 2015. Prior to her work with United Way, she served as the vice president of a national training and technical assistance organization, New Ways to Work. At New Ways, Charlene directed multiple state and national initiatives focused on improving the lives of young adults and building community partnerships. In addition, Charlene has consulted with local, regional, statewide, and national coalitions in urban and rural settings to design and implement programs aimed at improving the common good. Welcome, Charlene.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right? Yeah. Great. Thank you for having me here. It's so beautiful. I never complain about driving north in Wisconsin. My family and I moved here in 2008 from a commonly named place called Sebastopol, California, where I worked with the Sebastopol schools and several, actually, 13 school districts there working on some of these initiatives. So when I saw Sebastopol, I knew that that was the roots of Sebastopol. So I know that's not part of this program. But anyways, really happy to be here today. Thank you so much. While there's questions at the end of the program, I certainly want you to be able to ask questions and clarification as we go through the presentation, as long as we can continue to get through the presentation. Because there is a lot of information that I'm going to present today, a lot of important information, and I'm going to try to do that in a way that that I could understand if I were listening to it, and that helps to generate the conversation that I think will be more important after my remarks, and that is really understanding it from your local perspective. So, Alice. We want you to meet Alice. So Alice stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, Employed. So these are hardworking individuals that we know. This could have been you previously in your career. This could be a sister or an aunt or a niece. It could be your child care worker. It could be a health aide. It could be somebody that's fixing your car. It could be a teacher at a school. These are hardworking individuals in our community that might be struggling to get by. The United Ways in Wisconsin decided to bring the Alice initiative to Wisconsin because we were interested in some of the conversation that it had been generating in other states. So let me tell you a little bit about where this study originates, because I think it gives some context to why we were interested as the United Way. United Way Alice was the first project that we've done as a state network to this scale. And so that's important for us as United Ways. But this isn't about the United Way. This is about communities, and it's about your community and the entire state. So Alice was developed by the United Way of Northern New Jersey and Rutgers University. So in Morris County in New Jersey, it's actually a pretty affluent county in New Jersey. That's all I know about it. However, the United Way there was having conversations in their community, trying to figure out how to reconcile the need they were seeing in people that were struggling to get by, and then general community conversation, which was, we're not the urban center. We're fine. There's not really need in our community. They were trying to figure out how to reconcile these two narratives to understand how they could be more helpful in Morris County. And so they teamed up with Rutgers University and Stephanie Hoops from Rutgers, who is an expert in understanding kind of poverty, to try to figure out how they could frame the story so that their community would understand what the need was. And so from that, Alice was born. When I first started in 2014 and starting to talk with some of the local United Ways, Alice was introduced to me. I was a new executive, so I was a little skeptical about bringing such a large study for the first time by United Ways to Wisconsin. So it was interesting, we talked about it, but then the next year when we started learning more about 211, and I was hearing from the 211 call center executives that the types, the profile of people that were calling to find out how to access food, housing, utilities was changing, and they saw that change through the recession, prior to the recession, and it hadn't actually reverted back yet. It started to make me even more interested in what's going on in communities. And then the kicker was a group of citizens like you that were working towards trying to figure out how to improve communities asked me to come talk about Alice. Now, that group was the Alliance for Economic Inclusion out of Waukesha, kind of the greater Milwaukee area. That group is run by a woman who's connected to the Federal Reserve, and so in banking, and had heard about Alice in Indiana and Michigan, where the report had already been replicated. Her counterparts and my counterparts from those states they couldn't align schedules to come do a 15-minute presentation in Milwaukee, so they asked me to do it. We had not made a decision yet to release this report, or to do this study. And so I said I would do it as long as I could share the Michigan information and then ask a group like you, should we do this as United Ways in Wisconsin? Because as United Ways, we want to spend the limited resources we have well. So at the end of that presentation, I asked, do you know Alice? And the conversation just snowballed. Every hand went up, and then people started telling stories. They started talking about their sister-in-law whose son had been diagnosed with cancer and all of a sudden couldn't work and found herself in a situation she had never been in before. They started talking about how the passionate people that were working in childcare or in banking, and that they were trying, one blip of something that they didn't expect to happen kind of had set them into a different trajectory in their life, and they all of a sudden found themselves to be struggling to get by. The amazing part about that day was the generation of conversation. All of a sudden, the conversation shifted, and this was a group of folks, that nonprofits working on financial stability, and banks and financial institutions also concerned about financial stability. All of a sudden, it wasn't about those people. It was about, yeah, why is it so hard to get by sometimes when you're trying your best? And so we decided at that point to bring Alice to Wisconsin. So, just to reiterate this point a little, we oftentimes start to assign stories when we see something happening in a community, right? So I like to use this picture. Hopefully it's clear enough. This is a guy who's swimming. You guys can probably relate. You have a big body of water here, right? So think about it. So this guy's out in a big body of water. He's swimming. He's looking behind his shoulder. He looks a little tense. You can see the muscles there, if you could see that closely. His face is distressed, and we start to create a story. Did he jump off a boat? Did he get out swimming and he ate too much right before, and so silly guy shouldn't have been swimming? Does he not know how to swim? Like, what's the story? We start painting this picture of what he must have done to get himself in this distressed position, right? But what's going on, okay? We don't know sometimes what are the drivers that are creating a situation. And we could argue, maybe he shouldn't have been in the body of water, but would you expect a shark to be in your body of water? Not necessarily, right? We don't know what the conditions are that put him in this situation. What we do know, it's a dire situation. And so it becomes not about what he did, but how can we resolve the situation so that he's not struggling and eaten by the shark. Okay, so I want to talk to you about how the report has illustrated this for us in Wisconsin, and hopefully tells you more, gives you probably some things you already know about Door County. You guys all are very well in tune. You came here on a beautiful Saturday morning of Door County, but also gives you some talking points to do good work here. So, as I mentioned, the report was the study or the strategy of developing this methodology comes out of New Jersey. And while from a very well-respected university and a well-respected United Way, it's New Jersey. So we needed to make sure that we had a Wisconsin lens on the data, because the way our data looks here, it probably has some different context to New Jersey. So we had a very well-respected Research Advisory Council who, in their own area of the ALICE budget, were experts. So we didn't kind of norm the data. They told us where to look and where to get more information, and they pushed back on the various sections if it didn't seem right. And so I'm not going to go through who all these people are, but if you're familiar in any of these areas, they're very well-known individuals in their own right. So what does the ALICE report describe? So ALICE looks at four different ways at looking at the community condition: the household survival budget, the ALICE threshold, income and ALICE income assessment, and then the economic viability dashboard. And I'm going to focus most of my remarks on the first two measures. I'll touch on the third and fourth, but I think the real kind of power of this report is in the first two measures. So measure one, the household survival budget. The survival budget is based on 5 essential budget items for families with children. And for families without children, or households without children, we take away childcare. So housing, childcare, food, transportation, and healthcare. It's really important to know when you see this budget, and I'm going to show you the statewide budget, and then I'm going to show you the Door County budget. When you look at this budget, all of these budget line items are set at a very conservative level. And it was important for us to do that because when you look at the number of households that fall below that threshold in the state, we really wanted to make sure that nobody could say we had inflated the cost of living. Because it's really important to just have the conversation to not get tripped up in how the numbers were run. So for example, housing is set in the kind of most economical measure or benchmarks that HUD puts in place. So for a single family, it's a single adult, it's an efficiency unit. For a family of 4, it's a 2-bedroom apartment, but kind of lower cost apartment. For childcare, it's based on in-home care, not accredited childcare. So the childcare number is lower than if you were in accredited childcare, and I think you're going to talk about childcare here a little bit later. Food. And it was interesting, I think it was the Women's League of Voters that maybe put out a report years and years ago, and when we were looking at the comparison to the budget numbers in this report and that, the food number for a single adult had only gone up by like $7. So this food budget is set at, the USDA looks at 4 kind of levels of food consumption, or what it would take to live, and this is the most conservative level of a food budget. Transportation is based on, again, respected sources of data about what it costs to operate a car. It's not the cost of a car, it's the operating costs of a car, gas, insurance, repairs, things like that. If we were in an urban area and 8% of your population took public transportation, it would factor that in. So it tries to norm based on what the community conditions really are. And then healthcare, while we're a pretty well-insured state at the moment, healthcare is set as if you were not, you can't afford health insurance. So therefore, it's the out-of-pocket expenses for healthcare and the penalty that you would have to pay if you weren't enrolled in healthcare. Okay, so all very, very conservative line items. There's an additional line item of miscellaneous expense that really is just, let's add a little bit more because that's probably not all that people spend money on every month. So it's about 10% of all of those items, and then it includes taxes, because Alice is working and paying taxes. So for the state of Wisconsin, the report actually looks at the low and the high, but there's 6 kind of family or household compositions that the study is based on. And your Door County numbers, and Amy will pass these around in just a minute, I show all 6. So for a single adult in Wisconsin, that person needs to bring in $23,000 a year to meet this survival budget. For a family of 4, the household needs to bring in just under $55,000. So now we're looking at households, not necessarily individuals, unless it's an individual household, right? So when you look at this number, let's actually just switch here to the Door County budget. For a single adult, can you find an apartment for $400 a month in Door County? It's challenging, it's what I'm told. For a family of 4, for $688. So you see what the point is here. It probably costs more than this to live in Door County, but statewide, we wanted to make sure that people aren't going to get tripped up in the numbers, but actually understand what the numbers are telling us. So any questions about how this is just presented or calculated? Yes?
Just a general question. Is this going to be available to us? Can we get
The slide deck?
Yeah.
Charlene,
Yeah.
can you repeat the question since we don't have the mic?
Yeah, so the
questions
question
at
is
point?
this slide deck going to be available? And the answer is yes, we can make that available. So the second measure is the Alice threshold. And this measure takes that survival budget and applies it to our communities and the statewide households based on primarily census data and those other sources of state, national, and where there's available county level data to look at what does this look like county by county. So one of the reasons United Way was really interested in this report is unlike some reports where you only get data for kind of the really populated urban areas, we were able to get a methodology to get a glimpse of county by county, how would this apply across our state. So statewide, and I don't know if you saw any of the headlines, but when the report was launched in September, the headlines often were 42% of households in Wisconsin are struggling to get by. And that is the number in the state. In Door County, you do better. You're on that number. It's just under 1 in 3 households fall below that survival budget. That's still a lot of households in your county, though, right? And you're a very seasonal county, so you have other issues going on in your county that make things challenging and for you to kind of resolve as a community. The threshold looks at the population that would fall within the Alice segment, which is asset limited, income constrained, employed, which is the families that are above 100% of poverty, but below that survival budget. When we talk about the Alice threshold, in general, though, we're talking about the 12%, and these are 2014 numbers, the 12% that are below 100% of poverty, plus the Alice segment. That is the Alice threshold, that point. Okay, so that 33% is the threshold number. So on the right-hand side of the slide, it just gives you kind of the comparison to federal poverty numbers. So those of you that work in community development or working with trying to resolve poverty know the federal poverty numbers are very outdated in terms of how that's calculated. And a lot of people know that they're not really realistic. So what we do in programming, and you might hear this from some of the speakers later, is we start to do things like, one, assign labels, working poor, or 200% of poverty, or we have programs that will allow people that are 300% of poverty or 185% of poverty to qualify for those programs. So all along, we've been talking about this population that's struggling to get by. This is just looking at it in a different way and giving some dignity to the fact the people are working and they're still struggling to get by. It's not just about making poor choices and not, getting up and doing what we all do, which is go to work, and to try to change that conversation. Also, and it's important in communities like yours where you have a significant retiree community, the data looks at the household, head of household income based on age as well. So if you are over 65, you have other benefits that are available to you, so that is adjusted in this study. So that shows you those numbers. And depending on where you are in the state, those head of household numbers, you would see if you're looking in the appendix at the back of the report, those would shift. The report then looks at any of your sub-county populations that have at least 100 households. So if there's 100 households, you'll see that there is a number, and you can see there then the disparity across your county in terms of where people are living that are Alice. Are there surprises here? It's a different way of looking at it, right? So you could look at it as, what was that, 33% countywide, but then you can look at your county subdivisions, and this is on the handout also that was given, where you see the shifts in communities. Okay, and that's also why we were interested in this information, because it helps us to understand what might be going on in that community. You might know it, but you maybe didn't know that there was that much kind of disparity. So how can we figure out the solutions to helping more households lift above that threshold? Yes?
I'm not sure that I'm keeping up with the categories and percentages in my head as you go.
Yeah.
So using this chart, just to give an example of what we should take away from this chart. I live in Sturgeon Bay.
Yeah.
We know that our population has recently dipped below 9,000 people for the first time ever. So what are we told by...
So this is Sturgeon Bay. So there's 4,476 households in 2014. So that's households. There's also Sturgeon Bay Town, which is just you probably don't see it as Sturgeon Bay Town or Sturgeon Bay City, right? That also has 411 households. Those households that are in that township part, their poverty plus Alice rate is 20%. So their threshold is 20%. Those that live in the city part of Sturgeon Bay, that threshold is 41%. So those folks that are living in the town are doing better consistently than those that are living in what would be considered the city. Even though in your community, you probably don't really know the difference between Sturgeon Bay, town, and city. But because this is census data, that's the way the researchers look at running those numbers. Mm-hmm.
Are these numbers just based on employed households? It's not taking
No.
unemployed group homes, nursing homes?
So it does take,
Can you restate the question?
yes, so the question is, are these just working households, or does it include group homes, et cetera? So it's based on census numbers. So in the census, it's all single-family dwellings, well, apartments, so single-family households. So it excludes prisons, it excludes college dormitories, it excludes dormitory-type environments. But it doesn't presume that everyone is working in the household, because it does include kind of that significantly below poverty population as well. So the threshold is poverty, or 100% of poverty, those below 100% of poverty, plus the Alice segment, which gets you to the 33%, or in Sister Bay, 50%. Okay?
Another question back here?
Yes.
Well, I just wanted to say, if you look at the higher percentages, those are in the communities that have subsidized housing and low-income apartments. So that
Yeah.
probably pushes those numbers up.
So it would make sense. So yes, so the comment was, if you look at where there's the higher levels, the higher thresholds, those are communities where there's subsidized housing and other supportive environments. So it makes sense that people would be living there. Okay? So this is just another way of looking at that same data. This, maybe I should have shown this chart. So the gray is poverty. The green is the ALICE segment. So you can see how poverty, or 100% of poverty, as that is defined, fluctuates in those same communities. Yes.
About 100% of poverty. I know that you talked earlier that the poverty level federally has not been raised. Do you happen to know what year? I know that they have never wanted to raise poverty level because they don't want to really admit how many people are really poor in the United States.
It's like this.
It's something like back in the 60s.
Yeah, like the mid-60s.
Yeah, the poverty, so when she says 100% of poverty, this is poverty that was that number, not the percentage, or
Right.
it's not a ratio, it's what the actual dollar of poverty
Well, it's
is.
how it was calculated. So it used to be calculated based on food consumption, and so that's how it's calculated. It's not adjusted. Yes,
Carol
comment over
can
here.
answer that.
It was
Good.
actually calculated in 1963 by the Kennedy administration, by an intern that worked for John F. Kennedy. Her name was Molly Roshinsky.
I'm glad you know that.
It was based solely on food consumption for a family of 4. It did not incorporate so many things that we see today. Like, for example, insurance wasn't mandatory on your car. There's so many other things. The interest rates weren't the way they are today. And people didn't pay for, they didn't have credit cards. They weren't paying long-term for housing. I think the average back then of owning a home, if you had a loan, was about 8 years. Now we're looking at 30-year mortgages. So lots of things were not at all incorporated into any of that. But it was 1963.
Right, so it's well known that the measure is flawed because it's based on food consumption. And the thing in that budget, and we'll talk about this a little bit, that's the easiest to adjust if you have to scrimp is food. So it's not a good measure of what it really costs to get by. So this combines that poverty rate, any household below 100% of poverty, plus what we discussed as ALICE. Okay, so this chart, and these questions are good, because I'd rather you understand it as we go than to feel like this was overwhelming and not.
Charlene?
Yes.
We were going to do this later, and but these are great questions. So I'm just going to let you know that I'm going to walk around if people have questions,
Great.
so it gets on.
Great, and you might have even more questions once the panel comes up, right? So this is looking at, so the report takes this data and takes it back pre-recession, because we wanted to see what's this shift. We also didn't want people to say, well, it's just because there was a recession and we're going to be fine. We wanted to see what did it look like if you use these measures before the recession, 2007, and then every couple of years, how is this shifting? And so what we can see is that in Door County, your poverty percentage was 7% in 2007. You can see the recession, it goes up. And actually, in 2012, we should start coming out of the recession, right? And actually your households in poverty actually continue to increase. However, your families or households that are above the threshold is somewhat flat. 69% are above, so doing better in 2007. But in 2014, 67% are above the threshold. However, I would be interested in, working in the community, these poverty numbers haven't adjusted back, and you still have a good number of households that are struggling to get by. It's staying pretty flat. And what we know about these numbers is they're point-in-time numbers. You're a very seasonal community. You probably have households that fluctuate between all of these kind of benchmarks depending on what season you're in. So you have households that I would imagine that while there are jobs available and they can work, they might get into that ALICE threshold, or they might even get above the threshold and be doing okay. But during The off-season, you might have more people that are feeling the pinch and falling into either poverty, below the 100% poverty line, or back into ALICE. So there's great fluctuation between these kind of levels throughout the year, and particularly in a community like Door County. This, and Amy loves this, like, purple line. That purple line is really saying you have fewer households now. It's like 500 households fewer now than in 2007 in your county. So that's what that line is. It looks stark because of just, trying to make the whole chart look normed, but that's what that line is. So where does ALICE live? And this is a statewide slide. More than 2/3 of the municipalities in Wisconsin are below, have people below that 40% of the threshold. So that's a good number of counties in our state and a good number of communities in our state. The lowest being Calumet, 28% as a county. The highest being Menominee, which isn't really surprising, but there's great disparity. But there's a lot, this affects a lot of communities in terms of the percentage of their households that are below the threshold. The report also includes some other demographics. This chart, actually in a couple weeks, will have your Door County version of it. Right now I just have the statewide look, and this chart is really looking at age segments. So what we know is that for households that are trying to get by, there's different things that are happening at different points in time in their life cycle, right? So under head of households where the head of household is 25 or younger, this is the breakout. They're more likely to be below the federal poverty line and more likely to be ALICE. That's not that surprising because these are people that are just starting out. They're early in their careers. They might be in college still. And we know that. And we know that hopefully people are on a path that they're going to see themselves lift above that threshold. And we see that in 25 to 44 age span. You see that fewer people, households headed by somebody that's 25 to 44 years old, are below the poverty line, and fewer are in ALICE, that ALICE segment, but that's still a lot of households. And we're getting into the highest wage earning years, so it's still concerning. Particularly when you go to 45 to 64 years, still 1 in 3 households are below that threshold, struggling to get by. 65 years and over, this is actually something that was different in our state than other states when the researchers pointed out that so for seniors, those that are in retirement, they're least likely to be below the federal poverty level, but we have a greater percentage of seniors statewide that are part of that ALICE segment. And you probably have heard some of this narrative. People retire and they have to go back to work, or they're working part-time, or maybe their retirement was affected during the recession and so they have to retire later. We know some of these stories, but it was interesting that in our state, this population was hit a little bit harder than in some other states that have undergone this research. Here, you fare better than the state average of households over 65. 55% are above the threshold, 45% below. And as I said, Amy will have access to the other age segments here in a couple weeks. We also look at this information based on race, and there are disparities between Caucasian households and households of color. We look at that in terms of your county. Oh, this is further breakdown of statewide, and then we look at it in terms of your county, and you see disparities. Now, you're a pretty small county, so these numbers of households are fewer, and so it probably does swing more dramatically, but it's important information. There are disparities in terms of households of color and Caucasian households in your in your county. We also look at it in terms of households with children. Married households while less likely to be below the threshold than single-headed households, there's still almost 70,000 households with children that are below the threshold in the state. Single-headed households, while there are more single female-headed households, it's actually single-headed households by males that are more likely to be below the ALICE threshold in the state, which is interesting. Part of what when I've heard conversation about this, some of it is there's more stigma around being a male-headed, single-headed household and less likely to tap into services. There are fewer services, et cetera. I don't know because I don't specialize in that work, but it's an interesting piece of information. So where does ALICE work and how much does ALICE earn and save? So the report does, and we worked with Dennis Winters, the chief economist in the state, to make sure that we were presenting this data accurately. In 2014, there were, this is the breakout of $10 an hour jobs, 10 to 15, et cetera. But most 65% of the jobs were under $20 an hour, 30% under $40 an hour, and then a smaller percentage of jobs that are above $40 an hour. This is really not to make judgment about wages at all. It's really about, this is just the reality. We're a service state, and there's realities that come with that. So working with that reality, how can we continue to support households so that they can get above that threshold? We can look at job shifts, and it does talk a little bit about job shifts in terms of that wages are increasing, although the question is, are they increasing quickly enough to help resolve the problem? Yes?
I was wondering how that I was wondering how that compared with nationwide, because the whole economy has become service. We don't benefit very much.
Right. So it's not, I don't know the actual comparison to be able to quote the comparison. There are some studies, some ALICE studies nationally that do compare states that we could pull and share links to. You're right, though. Our economy, I mean, this is something that's being talked about in the economic development world, all over the place in terms of how do we reconcile some of these things, because it's not, and we have a slide, and as we're going to talk about it, there's not just one solution to how do you help households get out of this cycle of struggling to get by so that people feel more secure and they feel like they can get ahead and they can save for retirement and feel, and children can be educated the way they need to be, and all of those things that go into a vibrant community. But the report presents the information just so you can see it. It's not making any assumptions about what that means. Really, this report is a compendium of lots and lots of research and framing it just in a way so that people can have conversations about it. So there's also some information about the top 20, and this is to your point, in Wisconsin, top 20 up-and-coming jobs, and a lot of these jobs are service jobs. And in this county, you would see a lot of service-type jobs as a primarily tourism county. So measure 3 is about income and assistance. And I'm like leery of showing this chart sometimes, but it really is, I think the researchers, the point of this chart is to take a bigger step back and say, there's really not one solution. We need to work together as communities to figure out what we can do as individuals, what organizations can do as organizations, and what we can do as a community, as a government, et cetera, that it's everybody working together. So what this chart is telling you is if everybody was at that threshold, at that survival budget, that would be $43 billion in the state. And then it's telling you currently 46% of that amount is made up of wages. There's another 1% is nonprofit supports or programming. Some of that's United Way, but lots of other nonprofits as well. There's, and this drops off a little bit, 7% is government programs. It breaks out cash public assistance because it's a bigger piece, and it breaks out healthcare, which is 22% in terms of assistance. just to kind of break down and see how those dollars are right now, how people are getting by. And then there's a 21% unfilled gap in terms of bringing all households up to that threshold. So really, when you look at that, that's $9 billion. So the point here is, again, there's not one solution. This cannot be on the backs of employers only. This cannot be on the backs of nonprofits only. This cannot be on the backs of government only. It's what can we do as communities to figure out how to lift families above the threshold and help people on their path to getting what they need to get by and thrive. The fourth measure is the economic viability dashboard. And this dashboard is made up of 3 pieces, and it starts to try to look at some of the factors in communities that can make a difference. So one factor is housing affordability, and the measure is, and the rating, so every county is rated. The rating looks at the affordable housing gap, and I have a slide to talk about that a little bit to make it a little bit more digestible. The housing burden, which most experts in housing or financial stability will say your housing burden, and I can actually remember this from renting my first apartment, and they looked at my income and said you can only afford this much. The apartment complex would only rent to me if it was below 30%. So it's that 30% benchmark that your housing should be below 30% of your overall income. So that's your housing burden. And then real estate taxes. It looks at all 3 of those things in a community. The second dashboard indicator is job opportunities, and they're looking at income distribution, and what that means is it looks at quintiles. So the bottom 2 quintiles are 40% of earnings or wages. Is that distributed, are wages distributed more evenly across the community, or are there great disparities in wages across the community? So it's looking at income distribution. It's looking at the unemployment rate, which most of us are familiar with. And then it's looking at new hire wages to see what new hires are being hired at. And then the third benchmark is community resources. And this one's a little bit harder to gauge because we don't have really good data about community resources. So what they look at in the report is education, and specifically the number of kids, young kids that are enrolled in or 4K. Because the indicator and the belief is if you have a 4K program where people are participating in that, they have an understanding of the importance of education, and what we know loosely is that those communities are more community-minded when they support 4K. Health, in terms of the overall health of the community, and the number of people that have health insurance, and then social capital, and really that's measured by voting rates. In terms of communities where there are more voters, typically to be more community-minded. Yes?
Should there not be a 4th division there, and that is what the individual brings to the situation?
Sure. So this is, absolutely. So this is really just looking at a dashboard of these indicators in terms of the community. It doesn't bring anything in yet of an individual. And so, I mean, that's a good point. It's not something that you would want to discount. But the measure and the way the researchers, again, this was methodology that we didn't put together, but methodology that was put together by the Rutgers University and the United Way of Northern New Jersey. So yeah, there's probably lots of different things we could do to improve these measures, but this is just to explain to you what this means. Those are the things it includes.
Thank you. What about, I didn't see anything here on transportation. Is that part of that's part of the need, obviously.
Yeah.
But where is it measured in that? And if you have it in the
So
later
there's
slide,
transportation is measured in terms of the cost of transportation. The report doesn't go deep into right. So just in terms of the dashboard, this is looking at statewide that there are the light color counties. There are 3, on all 3 of those benchmarks, they rate good. So the rating is poor, fair, good. It's a loose rating. Okay? I mean, this is, I don't want to get stuck here because, like I said, the first two measures I think are where the strength of this report is. This is really getting at also how can we look at communities and does this help us with any information? But the majority of communities, there's only 3 that have good ratings in all 3 of those categories. So in Door County, you rate, and actually on your chart, it will give the, I didn't realize it's not populating on this slide. So housing was fair, job opportunities, poor, and then community resources, good. So that's how in Door County, and that's probably not surprising given the seasonality of your workforce and such. And really it's looking at, based on those factors, assigning a score. The bottom third are poor, the middle third of counties are fair, the top third of counties are good. Again, loose, let's not get stuck too much on that. But I did want to show the housing affordability numbers because that is outlined in the report. Transportation's not, but housing is, so I wanted to highlight it for you because I think it's interesting. So housing affordability, the yellow cylinder is owner occupied, the gray being renter occupied. And that of the percent of households that are below the ALIS threshold that rent, that have more than a 30% burden, this is looking at those measures. So looking at the housing burden, 31% of those that own are below the threshold. Of renters, 44% are below the threshold and have more than a 30% burden. Yes. This is Door County. Asked if this was Wisconsin or Door County. This is Door County. So your gap in rental stock in Door County is 1,200 units.
And that was in 2014.
In 2014. And that's assuming that's 1,200 units to get anybody that owns or rents below that 30% burden. Okay. So what are the consequences of living below the threshold? So this is what, part of what you'll talk about either after this presentation today or even maybe the panelists are going to talk about some of this, I would imagine. And the report outlines some basic consequences. We know there's consequences for the individual when they live below the threshold, and there's consequences for the community. So if somebody can't get to work, if they've purchased a car that they can afford and it's a car that may not be the most reliable car and it breaks down and you can't get to work, then that has an effect on your employer, which changes productivity and ultimately has an effect on a community. If people can't get to work, employers can't be productive, et cetera. So that's this kind of just, what is the consequence of living below the threshold? If people are unhealthy, they can't work. Or there's other factors that become involved. Healthcare is more costly, so costs rise. So there's all of the combination of how these things interplay with each other. Yes?
I just want to know where I can get that chart.
We will make sure the slides are available.
This one, okay, this
Yep.
one, okay.
Yeah. Yep. And actually, we could, I could just, this is a one-page, this chart and this, I've split it in two so it's a little bit easier to read on a slide, but it's one page out of the report. But it is in the report.
Well, you could give us the slides and they could go on the league website as
Yeah,
well.
that's fine.
And we have somebody who's technically qualified, they could go on our Facebook page, yes,
You
no?
could, so the report is quite heavy. So we didn't print a ton of copies of this report, but it is available in digital format on our website, and you probably have a link to that, and that chart is in here. It's also, if you're writing grants, if you work in this, and you're writing grants, or you're trying to build a case for a certain strategy or something like that, this report points to lots of really good sources of research that support some of these points. And so it's just a good compendium of research as well. There was another question? Yes.
I don't know when it's going to be brought up in the talk, but I noticed transportation is not covered. And I think that transportation affects so greatly
Right.
employment in this county. And I know if you lived in Milwaukee or even Green Bay, you could take a bus to work, but here, it's a serious problem. Is this going to be covered in any way?
I'm not going to cover it in detail in my remarks because I'm going really looking at the higher level. I don't know if any of the panelists are going to talk about that specifically.
I can add some comment on it. I did not bring a lot of data with me on that, but I do, off the top of my head, can give some information later.
Since we have two comments.
And I'm
it's
wondering, too,
obviously
if
moving.
perhaps Department of Human Services could talk about Dortran a little bit.
Yeah, so there's some consequences to living below the threshold that have to do with transportation, but it's not the statistics around what is the situation here, which I would imagine, because you're somewhat rural, and if your cost of living is high in some places, people have to find housing further away, and if you don't have reliable transportation or there's not public transportation, it's hard to, and the report does talk about that situation in terms of it's hard to get to where the jobs are if you can't afford to get there or there's not public transportation to help you get there. So it does talk about that. That's typically not what people bring up in the community presentations, so I don't have a lot of data about that, but we'll try to address some of it in the panel. Okay, so I'm trying to be cognizant of time as well so that we can get to the next segment of the program. So you each have your county page. If you're interested in other counties in the state, there's a county page for each in the report and on the website. This prints the survival budget for the low and the high composition of households, as well as the chart that details out your sub-county areas, the dashboard, and then the ALICE threshold. So what can be done? And this is part of what your continued conversation is going to be. I wanted to just talk, this is really dense slide, so don't try to read it. I'm going to talk a little bit. What we found, and we found this to be true in other states, and we're finding this to be true here, is that it's not just United Way that's trying to respond, that there's something that everyone can do to help change the situation or condition for ALICE. And I just want to talk about a couple of those things, the things that I've heard. So one, from employers. There was just a blog, and one of our United Ways had posted, where a major bank had made a connection, and they were having a problem with their IT department and finding skilled workers in their IT department. They also, in banks, have a number of people that are employed that would be in that ALICE segment, which there's a reality. There's only so much you can pay people in certain types of positions, and this is not an attack on that. But the struggle was, how can we fill our need from this employer's perspective of these skilled workers that we need, and we understand that it's not a survival wage if you're starting out in our bank. So that needs to be a starting place, not an ending place, as you're going through your work career. And so what they did is they created a curriculum that was an internal company curriculum to anybody who was employed by the bank could participate in this training, whether they had previous IT experience or not, and be trained and then be considered and hired into those higher paying jobs. That was a solution that solved that company's need for a skilled workforce and helped that company address how are we helping our employees move along that trajectory. So that's an example. Another example is I've heard in communities where, and there's one of the examples here is there's an employer network I think this is in New Jersey, where they were smaller employers. Their healthcare clinics were pretty far from where these employers were located, and they were noticing that it was taking a lot of time away from work for people, and people were not necessarily going to get the preventative care that they need. We know preventative care is important. And so what this group of employers did is they brought a clinic closer so that, and they shared in that strategy so that their employees had easier access if they needed to go to a clinic, which would reduce time away from work, help to support their employees, and help to make sure that they had more easy access to preventative care. So really looking at what are the strategies. At the National ALICE Advisory, so there's a national group, advisory council of national employers that help advise this project. One of those companies was looking at just how they, and I don't know that they've done anything, so I'm not going to name the company, but they started to talk about, well, what we do around healthcare, just paying for healthcare in many businesses is we give a percentage of, we ask employees to pay a percentage, and the company's going to pay a percentage, because really there's few companies that can afford the entire cost of healthcare these days. And so what they started to realize is that's a greater burden if you're below the threshold in their entry-level jobs, that percentage that they're asking employees to pay. So the thought was, what if could we flip it so that it was a percentage of your salary that you paid, and as you move to the company then, it wouldn't be that it's just a reward because you're making more money, which almost seems like something negative when you're starting out, but can we support our entry-level workers in a different way by flipping the way that we fund and ask for an employee cost share of healthcare? So I don't know if they were able to make that work economically for that company, but it's just thinking of things different that would help support households that are below that threshold. As the other thing that I hear is that sometimes we take things for granted. I know I do. I'm guilty of assigning a story to my younger sister. She works in a job where the confines of her job are much more restrictive than mine. If my cell phone is in my bag right now, because I don't want to be distracted by it, but some of you might have cell phones out on the table, or usually when I'm in a meeting, I have my cell phone sitting there. I have 4 kids. If I have a child that is calling incessantly during a meeting, I usually can get up, maybe not while I'm speaking to you, but I can usually step out and say, excuse me, and find out what's going on. Or if my child's school was calling me, I could probably take that call, and everyone in the room would understand. But in certain positions, and it's not that, there's reasons why in some positions you can't have a cell phone out, right? That's a very valid reason. But in certain positions, if there's an emergency, this happened to my sister, there was an emergency, the school can't get a hold of her. She lives 45 minutes away because she can't afford to live closer to where the job is. She's Alice. And we kind of were like, wow, she's not being very responsible. Like, why isn't she answering the phone from the school? Well, it starts to put this narrative together. Well, it's not that she cares less than I do about my kids or her kids. It's that her work situation is such, she can't just go take that call. So how are we working together as communities to understand, how does the school understand that it's not just the parent doesn't care about their kids if they need them at school? And how do we help families, people that are working, have access to be able to support their families while they're working? And that makes sense for their employer. So you can see where it's a very complicated issue, but there might be strategies and a way that we could look at that differently if we just understood and we just asked Alice what's getting in the way and what could help, instead of assigning our own story to what the problem is. Questions? I have 60 seconds, and you've asked questions, and then we're going to take a break and go into the panel. And I can still answer questions after that, too. Okay.
Looks like maybe we'll hold until
Great.
Afterwards. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, a couple of things. Before you get up to take your break, first of all, I need to rescue myself from being in trouble. Before, when I was thanking people, I ended with Laddie and got involved in talking about how you could get this videotape and forgot to thank the most important people here, actually 2 groups. Forgot to thank the speakers, who are really the reason we're here, but I forgot to thank all the other league people, and there are many. Nancy was very nice in assigning all this credit to me, but that is total baloney. Lots and lots of people put this together, and I forgot to thank them, so hopefully they're not going to drum me out of this organization. The other thing I forgot to do early on is ask you to turn off your cell phones. In fact, I just now turned mine off when she talked about it. So in a few minutes, we will begin again with our panel. Then there'll be more time for questions when they finish. We've allotted 15 minutes for bathroom breaks and coffee, but we don't need to take all 15. So if you can get what you need as soon as we're reassembled, or 10:45, whichever comes first, we will begin the next phase of our program. Thank you. All right, I think we will get started. One quick announcement. You see some papers on your tables. They are about upcoming events. There are some flyers. Take a look at them, see if they are of interest to you. And if you have a place that you would like to post one of those, you're welcome to take the flyer with you to your church or your whatever club or whatever might be interested in the program. All right, so this is how we're going to do the panel. I'm going to introduce all 5 of these folks, our local experts. We're going to hold on the questions until they're finished, all 5 of them, because we've only given them 10 minutes apiece, which isn't very much. But they are going to try to help you get to know our friends and neighbors who face the Alice Challenge each and every day. Some of them have brought materials which are on the table with the green tablecloth for you to take afterwards. We are also going to stop at 12 in terms of this presentation. If you have more questions and would like to stay longer afterwards, and if any of these folks have the time, you may want to speak with them afterwards. But we will stop the program at 12 so that everybody can get out and enjoy the rest of the weekend. It occurred to me as I listened that I now have more questions than I had when I came in the door this morning, and that probably will be the truth after these 5 folks. But the goal here is, as Charlene explained very eloquently, we hope to begin a conversation. And these are some facts that hopefully will help you as you think about it and as you leave here to continue that conversation. All right, so first at the far end, and they are going to speak either at the podium or at the table, depending on whatever they like to do. So Caleb Frostman will be our first. He's a Green Bay native and graduate of the UW-Madison. He is the executive director of the Door County Economic Development Corporation. Prior to joining that organization in November 2016, Caleb worked as a commercial real estate lender in Minneapolis for 9 years. During his time in the Twin Cities, Caleb served as a big brother to the same little for more than 5 years. He chaired the downtown Minneapolis YMCA's 2016 capital campaign, U.S. Bank's commercial real estate 2014 United Way campaign, and was a 4-time polar bear plunger benefiting the Special Olympics. And now he's found a home. Did you do this in Jacksonport? I have to ask.
Did you?
I haven't yet. I
Okay.
prefer to jump in a hole in the ice than to run into the beach.
Okay, all right. Well, I think they'll be looking for you. Door County Economic Development was founded in 1989, and it's a public-private partnership dedicated to improving the economic vitality of the county and its residents through a myriad of programs and initiatives. Next, we have Carol Wautlet. Carol is the Economic Support Manager with the Door County Department of Human Services, where she oversees 7 staff and the public assistance programs for Door County residents, including Badger Care, Food Share, Medicaid, Child Care Subsidy, Caretaker Supplement, and nursing home or community waiver participants, as well as ongoing case management for those cases. In addition, that Human Services Department also has the Wisconsin Home Energy Assistance Program. Carol holds a bachelor's degree from UW Green Bay in Social Change and Development and a Master of Arts in Counseling from Lakeland College. Most of Carol's professional work history has been spent working with underprivileged populations. Prior to working in Door County, she worked for UW Green Bay, Menominee Tribe of Wisconsin, and the Wisconsin Department of Corrections. Mary Ellen Smith is next. She attended Marquette University in Milwaukee and earned a Bachelor of Science degree in nursing. She worked as a hospital and home care nurse prior to joining the Door County Public Health Department as a public health nurse. She has been a public health nurse for 29 years and has provided a variety of services during that time with an emphasis on maternal and child health. Some of these services include prenatal care coordination, which is a Badger Care benefit that helps pregnant women get the support and services they need to have a healthy baby. Another program she oversees, or the services, is called First Breath, which is a quitting smoking program for pregnant women, home visits to first-time parents and other parents as needed, and health education and referral services for WIC, Women, Infants, Children, participants. Mary Ellen and her husband Greg live on their farm in the town of Sevastopol. They have 4 adult daughters and 1 grandson. Next we have Amy Kohnle. Amy was raised outside of Green Bay and attended Pulaski High School. She attended the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point, graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree in psychology and sociology, and with a minor in interpersonal communication. Amy was in the first AmeriCorps team in the nation and assigned to work for the Girl Scouts in the Wausau area. Her project was to develop a program that would expand Girl Scouting to the Hmong population. She successfully developed this program and published curriculum that is used throughout the United States with multicultural Girl Scout troops. In 1999, she was hired as the executive director of the United Way of Door County. Recently, Amy was honored by Help of Door County as the Ann Koch Social Justice Award recipient. And last but not least is Sandy Soik. Sandy has been employed with Lakeshore CAP Community Action Program Incorporated for 25 years. During this time, she has held the position of youth coordinator for the Door County Juvenile Restitution Program, an independent living skills program for foster youth. She also works with the Lakeshore CAP Food Pantry, Emergency Rental Assistance Program, and Project Hope. She has held the position of president of the Wisconsin Association of Restitution Programs and currently serves on the Door County Housing Authority Board of Directors. Lakeshore Community Action Program works to achieve self-sufficiency in all residents of the counties of Door, Kewaunee, Manitowoc, and Sheboygan. Their programs educate families, protect youth, secure shelter, deliver skills training, and provide food for the needy throughout eastern Wisconsin. This is a very impressive group of experienced people in all kinds of areas, I think you would agree. And so now I am going to be quiet and turn it over to Caleb.
I think I will come up to the podium just so everyone can see well, if that works for you guys. Thank you very much for having me. And as to the polar plunge, I only do it because I have so much insulation. And I'm a little nervous that the TV camera was here, but luckily I'm having a good hair day, so hopefully it turns out well. If you guys don't mind, I think what I'm going to do is kind of discuss what the DC EDC is doing to tackle some of these issues. And I thought it might be valuable, maybe it's not, but in my head it was, to perhaps maybe wrap up with some takes as the new guy in town, some things I've learned about moving here and perspective from coming from another area, specifically as it relates to some Alice issues. So thank you to Charlene. This morning's presentation was amazing. I really appreciate the comments and the themes on communication, a lot of that stuff, so I appreciate that. So as I go out, as part of my job, I go talk to businesses and see how we can help and what is their take on Door County's economic vibrancy, and the thing that we hear over and over again is lack of workforce, quantity and quality. And so a lot of our focus is on how do we fix this problem, and it's, Door County is not unique in this sense. Throughout Wisconsin, and I'll pause right a second, I promise this will not be a DC EDC commercial, but I'll start with kind of what we're doing. Throughout Wisconsin, we're not unique, but Door County is perhaps, the challenges might be exaggerated by our geography, being on a peninsula. We have a very wise, mature population. Thank you very much. And of course, our seasonality. So we have some unique challenges in the area that don't help us out so much when it comes to competing against other areas in our region or in the state. So what we hear from these folks is that there's a mismatch of skills and for the jobs that are open and the skill sets of the folks applying for them. And I can happily tell you that at DC EDC we are putting a really, really strong focus on connecting our business community to the schools and working on what I feel is our very best long-term retention strategy, which is connecting these students to local business leaders so they can be aware of the career opportunities here. And granted, based on my math, it would take about 18 years and 9 months to grow a new worker here, which is a long time, but making that connection is so vital and so important. We have other organizations in the county. If you guys haven't seen what the Boys and Girls Club is doing, they're doing some amazing things working with youth there. But that connection, deepening it and getting it there early and often is so important. We would never, ever dissuade someone from pursuing their dreams, even if it brought them outside of Door County. But we want to make sure that they know that their professional dreams can come true here, that any job that they want to pursue can be had here in Door County. And so we're working hard on that through a couple different initiatives. One of which is a software module, which allows students to cruise the careers that are available out there, but then we got an add-on that allows the students to interact with the businesses themselves and ask questions, set up mock interviews, do internships, and that's called the Inspire module. And the Raybrook Foundation was nice enough to grant us the funds to buy a 3-year license. We're very excited about that. We've got great buy-in from all the businesses we've talked to. We've had a great hit rate there. And then Southern Door just became the pilot school to implement this program. So we're excited to have students on the platform interacting with local businesses, getting connected, and making those connections deeper and stronger. And then we're excited also this year we are bringing back the high school home construction project, which has been on hiatus for a couple of years due to the housing market, so it allows students to have hands-on, on-the-job training for the construction trades. And then also exciting this year, we're bringing our very first manufacturing day. We've got a very successful shipbuilding days, which I hope to see you there on May 6th. But Kewanee just had their first manufacturing day. It was wildly successful. We're hoping to highlight some of the jobs that are available in the skilled trades manufacturing sector. Again, going back to the 18 years and 9 months comment, we recognize that, I think we have a very strong long-term retention strategy, but there needs to be some net in-migration. Charlene talked about it. During the city council forum you put on, candidates talked about, we're losing people, we're bleeding people throughout the county, and it's needs to be stopped. And so we're trying to be creative. We submitted a capacity building grant to the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation to hopefully fund a marketing platform that will attract. It's going to be specifically targeted towards seasonal homeowners, vacation homeowners, folks that know and love and are familiar with Door County that we would love to see move here on a permanent basis to be either buy a business, start a business, become an employee at a local existing business. We recognize the need for in-migration to the area, and so we're focusing heavily on that as well. We have a lot of other retention efforts that we hope to turn into attraction efforts. We have a young professionals group called Next Gen that we do, quality programming, professional development, networking, some other factors there. So we're excited about that. And a few things we're working on that I'm not really at liberty to talk about, but I'm really excited about. We're in the planning stages of those, so hopefully that can come to fruition as well. And if workforce is number one, and we talked about it a little bit as well, if workforce is number one, affordable housing is a very, very close second place. And so we're really, really focused on that as well. So it's kind of part of our Grow Door County initiative. But we've had some successes lately with, down in Sturgeon Bay, there's been a few purchases of land where up to 100 units of market rate housing will be developed. And then also on the single family side, we had a very exciting debut of a home buyer assistance video we just released within the last week. That was made possible through a grant by the National Association of Realtors for those first-time home buyers to see what programs are available, how the home buying process works. So we're excited to launch that. It's been really well received, and we're grateful for the funding from those folks. So jumping into some numbers, I won't try to bore you too much on this, but as I've kind of gotten into this, I've looked and my head's kind of above water. I'm 5 months in, and I've lived here for a little while. Taking a look at some of the unemployment numbers in the area, and this is not going to be surprising to anyone, but the Department of Workforce Development, February of this year, the winter, non-seasonally adjusted unemployment in Door County was 7.2%, which sounds like a lot, and it is a lot considering Wisconsin's 3.7. But in Door County in the winter, I don't think that surprises a lot of folks. And on a positive note, the trajectory of that number is decreasing rapidly. So in 2016, it was 8.5, in 15 it was 10.8, and in 14 it was 13%. So we're seeing some really strong traction there, which is great news. And then on a month when we consider Door County to be in full employment, perhaps July, in July of 16 we were at 3.5, which is pretty incredible. And that number is also on a positive trajectory. In 15 it was 4.7, and in 2014 it was 6.2. And looking at the winter non-seasonal adjusted number, that places us 66th out of 72 counties, which admittedly is a little troubling even with our seasonal nature. On the summer side, it places us in the top 3. So we have that unique kind of seesaw, that pendulum swing, which is a bit unique for Door County. Now on the wages side, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, we're 64th out of 72 counties at $634 a week, compared to $885 in the U.S. and just over $1,000, or $885 for Wisconsin, just over $1,000 for the U.S. And it's interesting, as we talk about communication, that's going to be kind of one of my wrap-up pieces. The labor participation rate today in Wisconsin is higher than it has ever been in the history of tracking that number. And why I bring that up is it's so, to me, the communication piece about, we need to goad these people off the sidelines and get the participation rate up. It's never been higher. There have never been more people in Wisconsin working than are working now. So I think it's important to recognize that fact and steer the conversation to being creative on other ways to find workforce. And of course, we're going to try to increase that rate, but it's never been higher. And so I think it's important to point that out, that there are more folks, it's a higher gross number of people working in Wisconsin than ever been working before. So that's important to point out. On the housing piece, we have had some successes. I've mentioned that. So again, I kind of wanted to wrap up, and I mentioned this. I went to a speaking event, not a speaking event, but kind of a round table at United Way with Amy, and Charlene touched on this. But as people in this group, I don't want to assume anything. We know what happens when we assume. But I assume folks in this room are interested and concerned about this issue. And so I've taken it over the last couple of years. I don't know how it happened, but just I've been very cognizant of the words I use and the tone I use to describe this issue. I've been in meetings with people who care about it, and they refer to them, assistance as handouts and entitlements, and the tone is one of, indignation or resentment. And this is, if we listen to Charlene, it's a very real issue with many sides to it, and there's not one silver bullet solution. But I do think that the way that folks who believe this is a real issue communicate about it, and the tone and the words we choose are really important. So I've been very careful. I don't advocate for starting another argument at the Thanksgiving dinner table, which today's day and age happens a lot. But for what I can do and what we can do, I've been very careful to choose my words. And the anecdotes I try to relay, everyone has an anecdote about their friend's cousin, sister who doesn't take a promotion because she wants to maintain her assistance. And when Susie introduced me, I was a big brother in the Twin Cities, which was an eye-opening experience in terms of working with impoverished persons. And the anecdote I relay is that his mother was a single mother of 4 children and worked 40 hours a week as a nursing assistant, had an hour to pick up her kids, get them dinner, and drop them off, and then worked 4 hours at Wells Fargo answering phones. And on the weekends, went to school part-time to further her professional career. And so for every person that's, for every friend's cousin, sister that's not taking a promotion, there's a LaTanya who's working 60 hours a week, putting food on the table for her 4 kids. So I just think it's important that we share those type of anecdotes as well and communicate in a helpful, collaborative, positive way and kind of combat some of the stigma that makes it hard to ask for help. So that's my 10 minutes. I'll be around. If you have questions, I'd love to hear thoughts on how you think DCEDC can help. We are aware of and giving time to ideas like childcare in Door County, and that's an issue. And there are more ways to tackle a problem than just one, and we're looking at all of them. So if you have ideas, I'd love to talk to you more, but that's my 10 minutes, and thanks for having me.
Good morning. Am I on? Can you hear? Yeah. Okay. Glad to be with you all this morning. As when I was introduced, some of you had heard I had worked most of my professional career in poverty-stricken areas. I could talk about that for weeks. Most of what I worked in were people who were extremely impoverished. And so the ALICE project, as a reminder, are not really those who we see in Door County Human Services for public assistance. And why is that? That is because the public assistance programs go by the federal poverty level. So those people, there's a cliff, of course, then. And so those people on health care or Badger Care, as you might know it, for example, their cutoff is $1,005 a month, and that's gross. So if you make more than $8.50 an hour at 30 hours a week, you have maxed out and you will be cut off of health care. So that now means you will go to the federally facilitated marketplace and pay for a premium for your health care. So same thing for food share. There is a cutoff, and we deal with people who are in the lower, much lower than the income guidelines of Alice. And by the way, of those people, Door County has 2,750 cases. The lowest end of that would be 2,500 cases in the busy season when people go back to work and they're employed. So you have somewhere between 2,500 and 2,750 cases or households of people who get public assistance, being food share or health care or child care subsidy or something like that.
Are people that you're, we're having, if you stay by the microphone, you can hear me better.
Okay, I have the microphone pinned on my shirt, but maybe it's
Move it up,
moving.
Carol.
While you came in, there was a period when it came in better, but then the other.
Okay, is that maybe better? Can you, maybe I should just hold it. Maybe I should just hold, does that work? Okay, okay, all right, okay. A lot of the research and studies that I have followed through the years were the work of Ruby Payne. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Ruby Payne. She did some remarkable work, Bridges Out of Poverty. If you don't have a chance, if you have a chance, go and look at that. It's well publicized. But she talks about a culture of poverty, and there is such a thing. It's hard to help people in extreme poverty if you don't understand the culture. There's also a separate culture for those who are middle class and those who are in the wealthiest socioeconomic categories. Barbara Ehrenreich is also someone who has done some remarkable research in the book Nickel and Dimed. It's an older book, and what she actually did is gone out in communities and kind of hid her identity as a researcher and a person with a PhD. And she masqueraded in these communities as a cleaning person and someone who took low-income jobs and tried to live on the income that she made. It's a remarkable read. It's very applicable still today, even though I think she did that some 20 years ago. If you get a chance to look at that, certainly look at that. It's called Nickel and Dimed by Barbara Ehrenreich. Poverty, the way that Ruby Payne defines it, is the extent to which an individual does without resources, and there are many resources. And some of the most impoverished people that we work with don't have a lot of other resources. It's not just financial. They don't have emotional resources. They don't have spiritual resources. They might not have mental health resources. They might not have family and friends to help them. Some of the other challenges here in Door County, as a tourist industry, as you know, you have a 6-month economy. Now, since so much of the work is based on retail, fast food, hotel industry, things like that, you can't really get ahead in a 6-month economy trying to make enough money for the entire year. So yes, you might make enough in summer that you get off public assistance, but then what happens in winter? A lot of times you haven't earned enough to get unemployment benefits, and if you are lucky enough to get the top unemployment, then you will make $1,470 a month, and then you won't qualify for public assistance anyway. That's only until your unemployment runs out again. Transportation, we've talked a little bit about that. We do have the DoorTran group that they do a remarkable job. It is funded by some transportation grants. If you had to try to fund that some other way, I don't know what Door County would do. As you all know, you have a long county, so people need transportation somehow. Even those people who are working really sort of have to have a car. And as we've seen in the information up there about the transportation cost, as Charlene said, it did not incorporate the cost of a car. So if you are socioeconomically challenged, and how are you going to get a car? Well, there's all sorts of predatory lenders who will be more than happy to sell you a 2000 car with about 200,000 miles on it at an interest rate of 9, 10, 12%, something like that, if you can get that good of a deal, by the way. And it won't last longer than your payments. You know, and then there's insurance. You know, we're working with a group of people who don't understand a credit score, who can't get a credit score going. It takes years to build that. And I don't think people always understand what a credit score can do. I mean, it's going to harm you. Our population, it certainly will. You don't have a credit score, you won't have access to some of the housing that's available. You won't have access to loans to get a decent car or any of that. Jobs, there are some jobs that will run your credit score. So your car insurance will cost you far more. All these things that, you know, they're not aware of and they don't know how to get there. It's not something we can take on at Human Services to get them there. Our goal is really just the public assistance cases that either qualify or they don't qualify. And that's heartbreaking and it's difficult, and they get caught up in that cycle. Poverty might be situational, but for a lot of people that we see, it's long-standing and generational. You don't have enough resources long enough to dig your way back out of that. So it's certainly more than a money issue. I had looked at some of the sample median salaries from the Workforce Development Board from 2011, and some of the sample median salaries are 18 to 21,000 for cashier, waiter, waitress, home care nurses, parking lot attendants, maids, child care workers. That's the group of people primarily here that you're talking about. $18,000 to $21,000 is calculated if you worked all year in that. Now we know, again, we have a six-month economy, so cut that in half, and now, you know, how will you amass any kind of wealth to get yourself ahead? The other thing, we talked a little bit about housing. Yes, there's a great lack of housing here and affordable housing for our people. If you're competing as a tourist community, you are competing with the tourists for housing all the time. So you can't compete with your waitress job, and I don't mean to in any way disparage that sort of work. I waitressed lots of times in my life. I had second jobs a lot of times. I loved it, I enjoyed it. People can make quite a bit of money. It's just that there are no benefits. It's nights, holidays, and weekends. You won't have childcare. Also in our retail industries here, there's such a lack of childcare. So if you have at least one child that isn't old enough to stay home by themselves, where do you get childcare resources? We do have a subsidy for that, but despite popular myth, it's not paid 100%. The state will subsidize your daycare if you go to a licensed or accredited daycare, $70 to $90 for 40 hours a week, which is far more. They charge you far more than that. So there is always a co-payment. It's not paid 100%. And if you think about $70 to $90 for daycare, I mean, you're working 40 hours a week. If you're lucky to get 40 hours a week, plus there's travel time back and forth, right? The least I've seen anybody pay is about $35 a week out of pocket, over and above what daycare charges. That's per child. So you're talking about some resources that they just don't have. Childcare is very limited, and again, we don't have daycare nights, holidays, weekends. Transportation is limited. You can't afford to get from point A to point B. And because you're on a peninsula, so in the wintertime, when your job ends, it's not like you can go to the next county over, right? You can't go east, you can't go west, you can't go north, there's nothing. So that would mean if you were going to maybe travel to Brown County to get some sort of work to get you through, again, you'd have to have a car and a vehicle and gas and insurance to be able to travel there to secure something that would get you through the whole year. We're doing what we can. This is a community of rich resources, really some great resources. Salvation Army is very generous, things like that. But again, that's one-time help, one-time funding for people that it can help them through in a crisis. But some of these people live in crisis mode every day. They're struggling just to survive every day, and there isn't energy left for anything else. So thank you again for inviting me here today, I look forward to working together to try to come up with some long-term solutions. Thank you.
I also wanted to thank all of you for coming here on this gorgeous Door County Saturday. My coworkers and I at the health department are really fortunate. We work with a great group of individuals. Many of them, their name could be Alice, whether they're men or women. We get to see them almost every day. One of the things that makes our health department distinctive is that the WIC program is housed in the Door County Public Health Department. That is not the case in every county in Door County, and is not the case throughout the United States. So we have little kids coming to our office almost every day, and I feel really lucky. I get to hold babies, and so on. So we feel very fortunate with regard to the people that we provide services to. I'll just give you a little information about WIC. I don't know if everybody knows what it is. WIC is a supplemental nutrition program funded by the USDA for some very specific foods that are chosen for their nutritional value. And it serves women, infants, and children, and I'll give you a little more data on that. The other really big aspect of the WIC program is that it provides education, nutrition education, and it also provides referral services. Some of us were called the WIC nurses because it's not at all uncommon for a young mom or a dad come in, have some questions, they got to get the nurse. Our WIC program is staffed by a registered dietitian, so she takes care of the nutritional type things, the breastfeeding education, and so on. But if there's other questions, it is often the nurse that gets called, and the questions can be anything. We have newborns coming into our office, so sometimes, is this baby's cord drying up right? Is this right? Yep, it's looking good. So we do tons and tons of things, and it's really interesting. WIC, to be financially eligible for WIC, you have to be below 185% of poverty. So that's the poverty guideline for WIC. A few people with incomes above that are eligible, but that's kind of a long story. We won't go into that. So I thought I would give you some information about our WIC numbers. And these are from March of 2017. So these are the most recent numbers. Right now, we have a total of 246 families participating in the WIC program. And of those people broken down, there's 79 women. And of those women, 29 are pregnant. 26 are fully breastfeeding. These are women who are only providing breast milk to their children. Two are partially breastfeeding, and there's some specific definitions. We won't go into that. 4 others breastfeeding. And then there's 20 postpartum women. These are women who are not breastfeeding, and they are eligible for WIC 6 months after they have that baby to, again, keep that nutritional status where we want it to be. We have 80 infants 80 Door County infants on WIC right now. One of the pieces of data I did not bring with me today were the specific birth numbers. We have about 200 babies born in Door County every year, sometimes 220, every now and then 230, but that's about how many babies we have. So let's just say last year maybe we had 220 babies. 80 of those babies right now are eligible, their families are eligible for WIC. And then we have children. We have 212 children, and those children are eligible for WIC from age 1 through age 4. Once kids turn 5, they are no longer eligible for WIC. In terms of looking at families, and if you think about it a little bit, as those kids are getting bigger, they're eating more. We have a lot of families come to us when that last child turns 5. They're sorry, they're not coming to see us anymore because they have really utilized those WIC benefits and found them so helpful to them. I'll talk just real briefly about our prenatal care coordination program. That is a program for pregnant women who are viewed as high risk, not from a medical point of view, but more so they might maybe not have an education, they might have housing concerns, they might smoke, different things like that. The goal of that program is to them have a full-term pregnancy, good birth weight baby, healthy baby. And we really get to know those women very well because we usually meet with them about once a month. In terms of making sure that we don't have any prejudices against anyone we serve, the other thing I think I should tell you, I have not ever in the last, I would say 10 years, had a pregnant woman who did not want to quit smoking. They're very sorry they're smoking. They don't want to smoke, but sometimes this is the way they've learned to deal with their stress. Anyone in this room who smoked knows it's hard to quit smoking, and I've seen it. I've seen it so often in my office. It is not easy. It is not easy to quit. Then the other really cool thing that we get to do is we get to make home visits. So I actually get to go to the homes and visit my clients. And as all of you know, there is no faster way to get to know somebody than to go to their home. And we often make home visits because they don't have the transportation to get to our office. They've got to bring all 4 kids into the office. It's a heck of a lot easier for us to go to their home than for them to bring the kids into the office. And the health department is also very small. So you got to remember, you know, if you've got that mom in your office and she brought kids with her, oh my goodness. Maybe she even has an interpreter with her. So the health department is small, so one of the services we can offer our moms and dads is to make home visits. And as I said earlier, we enjoy that. So I thought maybe what I would do, and I should probably watch the time, is talk a little bit about some of those home visits I go on. But in Door County, you have to be really careful because you know, I don't know if they would watch this on TV, but I sure don't want it to think I'm talking about them. But just as an example, it is not uncommon for us to make a home visit at 5 or 5:30. My kids are grown, so that's very easy for me to do now. I'm not picking up my own kids at daycare anymore. So one mom that I've worked with a fair amount, I visit her at 5 or 5:30. The reason why is because her day starts in the morning. She gets the oldest one off to school. She gets the next 2 off to a daycare with a friend. It's not always the same friend every day. So if you think about how her day starts, that's how her day starts. Then she drives to Sister Bay, cleans rooms all day. Then she comes back. The child in school is in one household at another friend's house. The 2 little ones, she's got to get them. They all come back. Well, now it's 5 or 5:30, and the nurse is there to boot. So you can only guess, and I'm there because of something she wants to talk to me about, something we want to talk about. And the kids are vying for her attention. They're vying for my attention. We have a specific goal that we want to accomplish at that appointment. Supper's not ready. When would she have gotten it ready? Those are the clients we see. This young woman, school was hard for her. She didn't like school, and she really doesn't want to go back to school. We need people that are going to Sister Bay to clean rooms. But she could, if we did, we have a horrible daycare shortage in our community. As Carol just spoke, she wouldn't be able to afford it anyway. But her kids are going to this variety of friends' homes, which we can all guess is worrisome. Where she lives, I wouldn't want to live there. I wouldn't want my children to live there. You know, and I think sometimes we don't think about that in Door County. We don't think, really, there's places where we wouldn't want to live? Yes, there are. She has made the most of her home. Her children are darling. She is doing her best. But that is the reality of her life. I have another mom who has a college education. She has one of those educations that isn't marketable. You know, those psychology degrees, sociology degrees, and so on.
Hey, I found a job.
Sorry. Sorry, Amy. Well, she's been having some trouble with that. She worked really hard to get her degree. She has 2 school-age kids. She has a little guy, and she is paying for daycare while she is pregnant. And now, and she has a pretty good job. What is she going to do? She can't afford daycare for 2 kids. And she is stressed out. I can tell you, she's a delightful young woman. So these are the women we see every day. We so enjoy working with them. And like I said, I feel like I'm so lucky because I get to hold babies. The other, I just think this is maybe just an interesting tidbit. We had a young woman call us just this last week. I thought it was so ironic. And she recently moved to Door County, had a change in circumstance. Her words to us were, geez, I was really surprised that there's help available here. I thought everybody who lived in Door County was rich. And this is true, and this occurred this week. So she was pleased there was some help available to her. I guess if I have a moment left. Oh, the partnership? Oh, okay. Another big thing I do, and I didn't include it in this just because we do a lot of things. About 2 years ago, a group of interested Door County people came together, providers. Amy, chime right in if you need to here. I hadn't planned on talking about this.
I'm after you, so I'll fill in what you miss.
Oh, okay, perfect. What we have found in Door County is that some of our children are not ready for school from a social and emotional point of view. And they're in our schools, and there is data to back this up, there are children who really are having difficulty behaving in school. There are 4-year-olds who are getting suspended from school. Well, if we think back to our childhoods, our children's childhoods, this was unheard of. So a group of us have gotten together. We're doing a wide variety of things to really look at this issue, see what we can do to help these young families. But I think of that very first mom I talked to you about. Her kids, they were fighting. They wanted her to read to them that night when we're trying to accomplish what I was there. But this is a mom. I mean, she's cleaned rooms all day. She's driven to and from Sister Bay. It's hard. Her life is hard. So we're just working together to see what we can do to help our precious Door County children because we don't have enough of them. And I guess that's all I was going to say today.
Thank you all for being here. And yes, you can use a sociology and a psychology degree. I feel very lucky that I have fallen into this job and have the ability to use my education. My parents kind of said, what you gonna do, Aim? Well, 17 and a half years I've been here as the director of the United Way of Door County, and I'm so thankful for that. Transportation was touched on a little earlier. I did not bring a lot of numbers with me for that, but just an overview of what we've been doing as a community to try to provide more affordable, accessible, and available transportation to our Door County community. DoorTran was started in 2006 as a program of United Way. They have since spun off into their own 501c3. They are currently running 5 different programs. The first one is a partnership with the Veterans Service Office. They work to get vets to their various appointments at the vet clinics. The other one is the county-wide volunteer program. So if someone really cannot afford a ride through any of the other providers that we have in the community, there's a sliding fee scale set up so that they can be matched with a volunteer driver. That volunteer driver provides their own vehicle, donates their own time, and transports this individual to anywhere in Door County that they need to go, as well as to Green Bay or Appleton, whatever their appointments may be. They also provide social transportation as well, grocery shopping, things like that through that program. Half-price taxi voucher program, because at no point did I ever want to put our for-profit taxis out of service, but not everybody can afford a taxi ride. So if they qualify by income, they can purchase a half-price taxi voucher. So if their taxi ride would normally be $7, they can get that ride for $3.50. And a lot of Door County residents, especially Sturgeon Bay folks, use our local taxi services to get to and from their jobs, especially our second shift folks. They have also recently started a vehicle purchase and repair loan program. So that is to help folks, as Carol was saying, they struggle to get that car loan to purchase that vehicle. So they go through a loan qualification program with Dortran, and that's either to repair their vehicle or to purchase the vehicle. That's a no-interest loan, so it helps them repay that loan. They have a reliable mode of transportation. It helps them also build that credit score so that hopefully they can move on to getting a loan with a local financial system. And then gas vouchers. This is very new for those who are employed. Maybe you just got a job, so you have no money, right? Well, you gotta get to work. You got a car, but how do you put gas in your car? So helping folks during that transition from when they go from unemployed to being employed and getting some funds to help them pay for gas in their vehicles. So that's what Dortran does. The County of Door, they provide the door-to-door minivan taxis, those green and white minivans that you see all over town and throughout the county. That is actually a program that Dortran refers people to use, but Dortran does not run that program and they do not own those vehicles. The county's responsible for that. Since we started that program with the county here, they are providing about 40,000 rides annually with that service. We know that neither of these are the silver bullet solution to transportation in our county, but we feel that we're at least making a little bit of a difference and helping people get the transportation they need. The island, we also have a partnership with them to help people cover ferry costs and things like that for their unique needs on the island. So switching gears to childcare. So you heard it's expensive. How expensive is it? Most of us in this room have not had children in childcare for a few years. And I'm always surprised by these. I used to work in childcare before United Way, so I knew how much then it was. So we have 3 what we consider licensed group centers in the county. So Northern Door Children's Center in Sister Bay, the Barker Center run by the YMCA in Sturgeon Bay, and then Adventures, which is right off of the highway, County DK, cuts off the highway like you're going to Brussels, so right there before the old Brussels Hill. So if you were to have a child under 2, 6 weeks old to 2 years old, 40 hours a week at the Barker Center in Sturgeon Bay, you would be paying $203 for a week of care. For Brussels Adventures Child Care Center, $163, and then for Northern Door Children's Center, $210. So that's a week, $210 times 4, we all know. That's almost $1,000. That's a lot of money. Carol talked about the state program where they can receive part of the dollars to offset the cost of that. And then we also partner with some of our centers, United Way. If any of you are donors to United Way, some of the dollars that we grant back out to the community are to help working families offset the cost of child care. So for some families, they receive some money through the county to help with child care, and some money from United Way to help with that, and then they still pay their portion. But for some families in our community, they cannot afford that at all. So they're making alternative choices. So we have in-home providers that are licensed. We also have in-home providers, such as Mary Ellen was talking about, that maybe it's just my friend across the street or the neighbor lady. Maybe it's the boyfriend of a friend, and I don't necessarily know who that person is, but it's the only child care option I have today because I have to get my kid somewhere, and I have to get myself to work. Or my child is school age, and I don't have a regular child care provider anymore, but my child's sick, and I still have to go to work because I don't have any PTO or sick leave. So we're making choices on where we leave our children and how that affects that child and how that affects our future workforce. Caleb's comment about 9 months and 18 years. We've got 9 months and 18 years to form those children into citizens that we hope stay in our community, are employed, are productive citizens. And that child care piece is a very important piece of that as they start out. I was also asked to talk about alcohol and drug use. So we didn't really talk about that during Alice, but we know here in Door County, here in Wisconsin, alcohol consumption is kind of just like, yep, we drink. Went out for my Friday fish fry last night, had a couple cocktails, and we don't really think much about that. But we know that it's a bigger problem than those of us who maybe went out for our fish fry and had our couple cocktails. So I just want to quickly give you some statistics. So these are all 2014 numbers. In 2014 in Door County, there were 13 alcohol-related motor vehicle injuries, so people who were injured in an accident due to alcohol consumption. 177 alcohol-related hospitalizations. So that could have been that motor vehicle accident, or that could have been an overdose. That could have been a complication of someone mixing alcohol with prescription drugs. 2014, we had 144 OWI arrests, operating while intoxicated. And the numbers for 2016, because I did get those from our local sheriff and city police departments, are comparable to that. So we're kind of at a stabilization point right now with our OWIs. Switching to drugs, in 2014, we had 32 drug-related hospitalizations. So people who were either going in to get clean or people who had overdosed, complications with mixing prescription drugs, various things like that. And then drug arrests, so offending a law around drug use, 113 in 2014. So binge drinking. We had our 2 drinks. That's okay. Binge drinking is defined as consuming for a man 5 or more alcoholic beverages, for a woman 4 or more alcoholic beverages in a 2-hour period. So 18% of Door County folks are considered to binge drink. 67 of us admit to consuming alcohol on a regular basis, but 18% are considered binge drinkers. As far as our kids go, in our public schools, in the 2013-2014 school year, we had 1 alcohol-related suspension, and we had 9 drug-related suspensions. So thinking about, these are kids. Kids are choosing drugs over alcohol. Kids are getting caught using drugs in our schools. We do something, the schools all do something called the YBRS, the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. This is something the kids fill out on their own. So they're self-reporting. So I can't tell you how accurate these stats are. Some kids might want to disclose their risky behaviors. Some kids may want to lie about their risky behaviors. But the information that we have from the 2015-16 school year, 17% of the high school students reported that they had their first drink, not just a few sips, but a full drink of alcohol at the age of 13 or 14. Marijuana use of our high school kids, 70% said they never used it, which is great. For those who did, the first time, once again, was between ages 13 and 14. And then 9% of those kids, this is why I'm saying this may or may not be true, 9% of our high school students in Door County are saying that on a monthly basis, they use marijuana 100 times or more. So I don't know how accurate that is, but it's something to think about as to where they're accessing it, how often they're using it, and why are they using it, which might be leading to some mental health issues as well. Other drugs, only 2% of our high school students are reporting that they've used other drugs, and 5% are reporting that they're using someone else's prescription drugs. So whether that's going into their parents' medicine cabinet, their grandparents' medicine cabinet, whatever that might be. So they are using prescription drugs as well. So those are just some stats. I could stand up here for hours and talk to you not only about these 3 topics, but so many other things that we've touched on today. But thank you again for all being here.
Well, good morning, and thank you again for coming out on such a beautiful day. Thanks to the League for the invitation and all the presenters here. It was very, very interesting. I'll go quickly here. I know we're short on time. Concerning the food pantry, that's one of our oldest programs. The Lakeshore Cap Food Pantry is a non-sectarian, non-for-profit organization that provides ongoing and emergency food assistance to low-income and limited-income residents of Door County. The pantry is open every Tuesday and Thursday for pickup between the hours of 11 and 4. Households are welcome to come once a month. In an emergency situation, food is provided on a more often basis. The pantry is run by volunteers. It's a client choice pantry, which allows the client to select the items they want from each category on the shelves. It includes everything from canned vegetables, fruit, canned meat, fish, soups, personal care items, miscellaneous condiments, cookies, and yes, they're not healthy, but every little kid wants a cookie once in a while. So we try to make sure that there's some kind of dessert for them. Crackers, dried beans, frozen meat. That's everything from pizzas, chicken, beef roasts, hamburger, ham, pork patties, salmon fillets, whatever might be available at any specific time. We also offer fresh produce and fruit donated by the general public and also our direct connect pickups from Walmart. Because we are Feeding America members, and Feeding America used to come from Milwaukee, pick up food from Walmart, take it back to Milwaukee, we would buy it, they'd transport it to Amro, and then they'd transport it to us. Well, we thought that's not very economical. So we agreed that we would pick up from Walmart 3 days a week, and we have to record everything, weigh everything, report everything back to Feeding America. But it's a direct, so it's really great. We get lots of fresh vegetables, lettuce, all that fancy organic stuff, produce, meat, broccoli, avocados, mangoes, you name it. A lot of our families have never had a lot of these things, so we have to give out recipes. And, our volunteers are great about giving out recipes. They love to talk about cooking. Client choice enables the families to select specific foods. Maybe they have a medical issue. They have likes and dislikes. We'd prefer that they're taking food that they're going to take home and use, opposed to not just giving it to them and say, here, use this. You get 8 cans of green beans. Well, maybe they don't like green beans or there's too much salt in them. The amount of food distributed to each house is dependent on the size of the family. Each house leaves with a 10 to 12 day supply of food, depending upon their selections. Some younger families don't know how to cook whole chicken, so they would prefer to take a pizza. As I say, our volunteers talk to them about how to make that chicken and all the different things you can do with it, or ham, or whatever it is. The pantry distributed over 102 tons of food to pantry clients in 2016. I know that number is accurate because I divided, thinking, okay, 2,000 pounds in a ton, this can't be right, 102 ton. I had to call my husband and say, there is 2,000 pounds in a ton, right? He said, yep, so that's correct. The volunteers provided 2,600 hours of service to the pantry. During 2016, we served 3,031 households, or a total of 5,777 people. Of the 3,000 households, 145 were families that had not been at the pantry before. We also provide food to Washington Island Pantry. They serve approximately 200 households, 20 households per month. Donated items and funds come from the community, other organizations, individuals that have taken us under their wing. And with that money, we purchase food from Feeding America. We can buy any item from Feeding America for 19 cents a pound, with the exception of meat. It used to be 19 cents a pound. They've raised it up to 25 cents a pound, so it's still workable, and it's great. We get everything from T-bone steaks to salmon fillets to lamb, duck, turkeys. So I just want to say our clients and our volunteers, we become friends. We've seen a lot of these people for years. We're kind of a social outlet for them. Some of the elderly people, maybe they don't have anybody else to talk to, so they come and they tell us their stories. Their children came to visit them or they didn't come, whatever it might be, their medical issues. Oftentimes we can refer them to other agencies that can provide assistance with those issues that they're having. So we not only You know, it's not just within Lakeshore Camp, but we've been around so long, we can usually send them to 2 or 3 other places to possibly get some assistance. There's just, to finish up with the food pantry section here, I just want to read a little note, part of a note that we received from one of our clients. It says, "Thank you for remembering me at Christmas with a card and with a Christmas greeting and a signature. But it goes further than that. Your service gave me a chance to be a regular, normal part of the community. I'm not a scavenger. I have a vehicle. I am poor, but yet I have dignity. And every time on a monthly basis, your facility makes a difference." So we really do become friends with our clients. We have another program. This is a new program to the agency. It's a Cradle Career program. The coordinator is sitting in the back here, Chris Miller. Her program is a program that serves young families in Door County. The goals of the program are first to connect parents with services in the community that might be helpful and appropriate for their needs. Second, to provide one-on-one support. Chris meets with them as many times as they want to meet. Hopefully, you know, she tries to meet once a week, and that one-on-one really engages the client, and they feel comfortable with Chris. She helps them meet family goals, build stability, and move towards self-sufficiency. And that's the important part, the self-sufficiency. She wants her families to not need all our programs, to get out, be able to maintain on their own. So education is a big part of that. We also have in our emergency rental programs, we have rapid rehousing. That assists qualifying homeless individuals and families to secure and maintain stable housing through financial assistance and case management services. Now, when we mention homeless, I did have a homeless person in the other day. He said he had slept in the park the night before. So we immediately have him fill out an application. We email that over to a trained case manager in that funding in our Manitowoc office, and then that person, after looking over the application, calls back, talks to that person before they leave the office. Well, we don't have a homeless shelter. So what do? Well, we can contact other agencies to see if they can possibly help them, maybe one night in a hotel. But it comes right down to this person has to be transported to Green Bay, to a shelter, to Manitowoc, to a shelter, to Sheboygan, to a shelter, whatever might be available. So yes, Door County does not have a lot of homeless, but on occasion we do. If it's a family, there is a shelter in Manitowoc County that does accept families, so we contact them immediately. We also have an emergency rental assistance program. It helps qualifying individuals and families who are at risk of becoming homeless to obtain or maintain housing. Community referrals and case management is provided. So once again, they go through an application process with us. We refer them over to Salvation Army, to Katie's Fund, to St. Vincent de Paul, any place that possibly could help them. Maybe if they belong to a church, there's someone that can help them there. I think the case management is important there also because it's just not walk in and drop it, here's some money. The families need to be able to pay their next month's rent. You know, for us to provide one more month's rent, they already are behind on their rent $3,000, it's not going to help them. So that case management is very important. Long-term, make sure they can maintain and stabilize their life. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I just feel like my head is spinning. So much information you've all shared, and I want to give you a chance for a few questions. I will come over to you and so you can speak into the microphone. Anyone want to learn one more bit of information?
I'm curious what the under 18 pregnancy rate is in Door County. I know nationally the numbers have gone down hugely, but I'm just wondering here in the county, and where would anyone access planning for pregnancy? Because there is not a Planned Parenthood here.
I'm going to refer to Chris for this, for that answer.
Chris Miller is our Cradle to Career coordinator, and she would know that best.
I
don't have specific numbers off the top of my head, but I know at one point they had a teen parent program that actually had enough teen parents in the schools that they had group classes and stuff. That was back, I believe, in 2000, around in that time. But then after family planning became more available through some various clinics in the community, that rate went down. Now, with the closing of the community clinic, which was the most recent family planning provider, we're seeing an uptick in teen pregnancies in the schools. We're not at the 2000 levels yet, but those are the moms that I serve. There's several in 2 schools that I'm seeing right now, and helping them just have healthy pregnancies, stay in school. The counselors are really working with me a lot to support their school program. And I am a nurse, so I always talk about family planning as well. But it's the cradle to career right now, and in cooperation with public health and family services that provides parent education, we all work together.
My question relates to Planned Parenthood. I used to be one of the presidents of Planned Parenthood at one time, and I'm getting older, so a lot of time has passed. I'm not up to date on what's going on, so I don't know this Cradle program that you're talking about. But Planned Parenthood used to have a number of services that had to do with women's health and preventing pregnancy and serving women in that age group. And I just wondered, this program, do they have services similar to Planned Parenthood? Is there something that does something about the services that Planned Parenthood used to cover?
You want to do that, or is there someone? Oh, be Chris.
I'm glad I came. Like I said, the family planning information, the contraception information that the family planning clinics had been providing, that's up to the healthcare providers that are now in the community. I know in the schools, I believe the nurses or other educators can talk about STD prevention. I don't know how much contraception information they're allowed to share in the schools right now. So the women's health is provided by our providers, but I don't think the Planned Parenthood model is really there anymore with family planning gone.
Anybody else? Any questions for our panelists? Okay, don't go away. I need to get back to my notes.
Could I just add one thing?
Yes.
We talked, when we're talking about housing, you know, we can't help people find housing. They need to find the housing themselves when they receive assistance. I've been watching the paper. There's maybe 2 apartments available in the Pulse at any one time, 1 in the Advocate. Housing is very, very short. It's almost impossible to find rentals.
The Affordable Housing Committee through Economic Development, we're aware of that and working on it. And as Caleb said, we have some new partnerships with the city going on.
We're excited.
Also, I did hear at a meeting that there was a family that did find a large house that they needed because they had a large family. It was going to be $700 and some a month. They had another person come in and say, "I'll pay you $1,000." They lost the house.
Susie? Well, can I get one more thing real quick? The other piece I forgot to mention, when I mentioned being the new guy in town, the one thing that surprised me the most was how many folks work multiple jobs here. And not just servers and baristas, but I know attorneys, bankers, and accountants that work multiple jobs here. So it's indicative of the work ethic in Door County, but also some of the wage issues we talked about. But yeah, it's interesting.
Anything else any of our panel, maybe Charlene or any of the others, as you've heard each other, would like to add to this whole thing?
Maybe if each panelist could just say one thing that they think would help the most in their area.
Okay, he's asking that each panelist say one more thing that they think would help in their area. We don't have to go in order unless you're ready to go, Caleb.
Why don't someone else jump up? I'll jump in a second. Yeah.
I'll go first because I could talk forever on this. But one thing, I think just groups like this, you guys coming together on a Saturday morning, becoming educated. The United Way slogan is give, advocate, volunteer. Today that advocate piece is what I ask you to do. Go out, talk to the people you see in the next week, talk about Alice, talk about what you've learned, and figure out how you can get involved to help us create change in our community. So whether that's volunteering for one of the committees that you heard about, starting something new, starting another conversation, please carry this information forward and help us continue to create positive change in our community. You will hear from many of us that we are one of the best grassroots communities. Many of you have helped start many of the programs that we talked about today, and we need to continue doing that. What services are needed, and how can we create programs and services to meet the needs of our community?
Anybody else?
I just wanted to, two things. On the Alice presentation, I wanted to clarify there was the pie chart of where some of this assistance came from, and there was a slice in there that said cash assistance. And there really isn't cash assistance anymore. That was AFDC, which ended in 1997, and then it was called W2. It's now called W2. Human Services does not have that program. That is contracted with Forward Services. And the W2 program, the only cash assistance people can get is they have to work somewhere to get that. The payment is about $650 a month for working almost full-time. And so what they would be doing is like job shadowing somewhere. These are people who are learning some job skills, so they're not being paid a wage at all. So if you think about that, a little over $600 and some a month, that's the only cash payment that people qualify for anymore, and it comes through the W2 program. But as far as help, what I can offer is mentor someone. Just mentor someone, and there's so many ways to do that. You can teach them how to cook. You could maybe borrow them some space in your freezer, because a lot of these people who, they don't have freezer space. Give them a ride. Offer them a way to plant something. Even if they don't have garden space, they can grow, tomatoes or something like that in a pot on their porch. But a lot of them lack those kinds of skills, and they lack that information. So mentoring someone is so important.
Before the others do, something I thought of as I listened. I had the privilege to talk to all these people about what they were going to say. And something that came up in one conversation that they alluded to is the childcare we do have, am I right in remembering, is only during the week, during the business hours.
Correct.
So if you are working, as service people do, on the weekends, you don't have any.
Yes,
No
that's
opportunities
true.
in this community.
That's true. Well, and Amy mentioned Adventures Childcare in Brussels. That is not a childcare facility that the state, that you can use a subsidy for. And the reason for that is that if you're a licensed daycare, you have to participate in something called Young Star Rating, and you are reimbursed according to that rating, and that means doing lots of other things with educating your workforce that work there. They don't participate in that, so people who go there don't get the subsidy. That's
correct.
Anybody else?
Well, I think it's a really excellent question, but it's one that's hard to answer. I think knowing that I had quality, affordable daycare for my children, I did not have family here when my kids were small. I did utilize friends, but these were friends I knew very well. It was a very specific arrangement. We do, I think Amy alluded to that. Sometimes some of the clients we work with don't want to tell us who's taking care of their kids, and that really makes us nervous. Because I know how my kids so benefited by daycare. And I knew they got a really good lunch, they got breakfast, they got the afternoon snack. And my heart goes out to these moms who, Amy's not exaggerating when she says somebody's boyfriend is taking care of these two precious little kids during the day. So I guess if I had to pick one thing, that our daycare situation in our county worries me, and housing. So.
Okay, anyone else?
On the, oh, go ahead, Charlene. Okay, just on the personal side, to echo what Amy had mentioned, I'm probably preaching to the choir, but the whole idea of this, the empathy, that if we can give someone the benefit of the doubt that their situation is not due to poor decision-making or impulse control issues, and also part of empathy is that sometimes it's saying, I don't know what it's like to be in your shoes. You know, I don't know what it's like. And then the professional side, again, to echo what Amy said, get involved, whether that's on a committee or coming to events like this. I think that's so important to be engaged and involved. So.
Okay, Charlene, were you?
I would just say, and echo, I think the theme is if you can dispel myths and seek understanding. That, and I think you said, you've not, when I talk with families, with individuals, they want what's best for their kids. They want what's best for their family. They just sometimes don't know how to get there, and there are real things that get in their way. It was a profound moment when I was listening to a session where there were professionals and those with lived experience talking about what gets in the way. And I used the example of the cell phone because it was profound for me when the young woman said, I can't call the school back, and the school thinks I don't care about my kids. It was profound for me because I hadn't ever thought about it that way before. So if you can take and help others to, instead of continuing to divide the conversation, to seek understanding so that we can figure out how to really attack really hard issues. And it sounds like you have some themes in this community that are really worthwhile to look at deeply, and you are. But to, however you can, to be part of that conversation will help.
Sandy, did you want to add anything?
Well, I think everyone here has really covered important issues with all the problems that we are seeing. But I think when it comes right down to it, for me, if you don't have daycare, you're going to lose your job. If you lose your job, you're not going to be able to pay your rent. You're not going to be able to buy food. Now you're back to square one. How do you get out of that hole and work back up so you can get that job, but you have to get that daycare?
We're just about out of time.
Just on the daycare situation, I know you said that the communities that have 4K are considered better communities, or it's a plus for the community. But I know here, when 4K started, that undermined at least one of our, or maybe two, of our child care centers, because the 4-year-olds kind of supported the younger kids because of the ratios that they need. So what do we do about that for child care?
That's a good question.
So we're working with Economic Development, Human Services, and the Door County YMCA, and have had communications with Northern Door Children's Center as well about what can we do to start creating solutions around childcare. Yes, the moneymaker in the childcare model is your older kids. As we get 4-year-old kindergarten, those older kids are not in our childcare centers anymore, except at Northern Door Children's Center. Gibraltar does not offer 4K. Northern Door Children's Center offers 4K. That's a very unique model that they have there. So we are trying to learn from other communities, do some research, and figure out how we can get more childcare options in our community. It is not going to be a quick fix, though, and if you're interested in learning more, want to serve on a committee, let me know.
When we talk about child care, the one group that doesn't come up, my kids used to be called latchkey kids. How much of that goes on in Door County? And what is the solution to that? We have the Boys and Girls Club, but that doesn't serve the whole county. Is anybody monitoring that and figuring numbers on that?
That has not come up recently in discussion. I feel between the two YMCA sites and the Boys and Girls Club, we have a little better grip on that, Betsy. But it is still, I think, something our parents do struggle with. When I worked with the Community Foundation and the Women's Fund this past year to facilitate community discussions, that after-school piece, latchkey kid piece, did not come up that much. Carol or Mary Ellen, if you're seeing that.
I think it's certainly a concern because there's that issue. At what time are those kids safe? And I see that with my couple of my coworkers right now, where their kids are in that, you know, in-between area. Truthfully, though, I've not heard a lot of discussion about it. I think I get involved so much more with the littler kids, but I'm sure it's a concern. But the Boys and Girls Club, our Boys and Girls Club, we are so fortunate because so many of the kids can go there after school now.
Okay, this could go on for days, and probably should go on for days, but I don't have any sleeping bags for you. So we are going to stop in a second. It is said that knowledge is power, and I'm hoping that our speakers have provided you with a great deal of knowledge regarding the challenges that are faced each day by the 21% of our population that makes up the ALICE group. We hope this knowledge can begin a community conversation about ways we can all work together to support our citizens in providing for their families and themselves. And wow, you guys did a great job. Thank you. Have a wonderful Earth Day weekend. Yes. Thank you for coming.